There exists a very real difference between a tank or a fighter jet and a tank or a fighter jet with advanced fire control systems and defensive countermeasures. This is what actually matters in the designing of a modern weapons system. For a tank, armor thickness and the power of its main gun matters little if it goes up against an enemy tank with a better stabilizer, sighting scope, and fire control system that allows that enemy tank to see its opponent earlier on and allows it to get the first shot off with a tremendously increased chance of scoring a hit on that first shot. Likewise, a fighter jet's speed, maneuverability, and weapons payload is useless if it goes up against another fighter jet that can detect it and fire on it sooner from a greater distance, and if necessary, jam any attempt of its opponent to shoot back. The key to the superiority of a modern weapons system is not the weapon or its ammunition. It is the range from which it can confirm the detection of an opponent, the range that it can accurately launch an attack on that opponent, and the efficiency by which it can continue to maintain that accurate attack whilst also dodging incoming fire either from that opponent or even a second opponent or multiple opponents also involved in the given engagement. This is the realm of military electronics. The United States has had a solid lead in military electronics since the 1980s, having effectively perfected miniaturization and data efficiency and capacity. The most advanced electronic systems components in modern weapons platforms today, particularly airborne platforms, such as fighter jets, almost always has design origins in the United States, even when produced by the defense companies or company of a US ally. The general rule for US allies with their own military industries is that they can acquire certain US electronic systems, even so the right to produce the systems themselves under license, so long as 1. They pay the right price, and 2. Agree to observe re-export rules, that is, the sale of their licensed produced versions of that given system to certain other countries. In this capacity, the rule towards potential rivals, such as China and Russia, is neither US companies nor the defense companies of allied nations can sell advanced offensive electronic systems, such as fire control radars, to either of these nations for obvious security-related reasons. One does not give away their leading-edge war technology to foreign competitors. Yet, despite these obvious rules and regulations, Israel sells advanced fire control radar technology, laser targeting technology, aerofoil design secrets, missile technology, UAV technology, and even tactical satellite technology, which the United States has since 1989 blacklisted China from getting access to via allied country defense companies. This is not a great secret. In fact, the 1990s witnessed major mainstream media outlets talk about Israel's blatant military technology trade with China. However, this ended by the 2000s. In the early 2000s, however, civilian and military intelligence agencies still talked about it in investigative reports and papers circulated from within their own respective departments. However, since then, it appears that even these agencies have stopped mentioning such activities by Israel in their reports. There really is only one explanation for this: Israeli lobby power. Another way in which Israel appears to be exempt is their need to pay for the US-built military systems, including advanced electronic warfare systems, which they purchase from the United States. They are actually even exempt from having to pay for the license to reproduce some of these systems within their own military industry. This is the US subsidization of Israel's military and its military industry. No other US ally has this kind of privilege. So, in effect, we have Israel being subsidized by the United States to buy United States weapons technology, which it then reverse engineers with its arms industry that is also subsidized by the US, and many of these critical technology systems, which are essentially paid for by the US all the way, are then sold to China, a very real rival of America, in complete violation of US weapons technology embargoes that have been placed on China since the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989. What kind of ally is this? One whose lobby constantly pushes the United States to fight wars that only benefit Israel in the Middle East? One that acquires top-end US military technology, often at no real cost to its own economy because the US subsidizes it, and that then sells these key arms technologies to China, an act which directly undermines the security interests of the United States. What needs to be understood is that Israel is selling military technology to China that not even Russia, with its equivalent systems made by Russian industry, will sell to China. Because in some cases, even for Russia, certain things are just too secret to share. In fact, it has been noted in contemporary investigative reports that where China cannot acquire a certain type of advanced military technology from either Europe or Russia, Israel often fulfills that specification with its own so-called domestically produced systems, which are in fact products of US military industry. Whilst it is not the objective of the following statement to promote aggression or fear-mongering, it should be noted that the reality is that in the current geostrategic situation, Russia, Iran, and Syria are not a threat to US security or political or economic interests anywhere in the world. Not even in Europe in Russia's case. On the other hand, China is. China is aggressively expanding its military footprint in the Pacific, and it challenges US economic power through unfair economic practices, including corporate espionage. Israel is abetting this entity, selling it key military technologies that increase the capabilities of China's armed forces, in an act that only serves to be detrimental to US and Western security interests in the long term. And as if the sale of reverse-engineered US military technologies to China in direct violation of US military export standards and regulations is not treacherous enough, then look at the case of Taiwan, which is a pro-Western democracy that defends and represents researchers have specifically pointed out that Israel deliberately limits its interactions with Taiwan to almost nothing, even at an unofficial level, in order to maintain the confidence of Communist China for continued military cooperation. In effect, a democratic country, which by the way recognizes Israel, is neglected just so Israel can sell advanced US-derived weaponry to an emerging power with virtually the opposite set of political values. Again, what kind of Western ally is this? Under the Trump administration, the US has taken a tougher stance on China. Recently, Vice President Pence did a speech, 10 minutes long, talking about China and why the US is now taking this more aggressive approach towards dealing with China economically and militarily in the Pacific. Pence's speech on China was absolutely correct. In fact, it was flawless. He said no lie. China is engaged in aggressive corporate espionage, political and intelligence undermining, and military expansion. However, amazingly, Pence failed to name Israel as China's key aid in this fundamentally anti-US and, more generally speaking, anti-Western pursuit. The reasons for this are obvious. Pence is a Zionist Christian. And this is the problem. He will correctly name a challenge to the US, but he will not name those who abet it if it contradicts his neoconservative values. This is why neoconservatives, as Ron Paul said, are not conservatives at all. They don't care about America. They are solely there in whatever positions in public power they are in to be a mouthpiece for Israel. And that includes talking about real problems facing the US, but not talking about how, in the case of China, Israel helps that problem along against the interests of the United States and the Western world more generally speaking. Now, just to clarify, this does not mean that China and Israel are engaged in some grand conspiracy. China does in fact pursue aggressively an anti-Western agenda along economic and now military lines. Israel, however, does what it does because it doesn't care, and it's just pursuing its own selfish interests, and it keeps getting away with it, so therefore it keeps doing it. Despite the fact that the US so vehemently defends Israel on virtually every foreign policy matter, and that the US heavily subsidizes the Israeli military and Israeli military industry, as far as Israel is concerned, there is no mutual loyalty to be had. Any other defense company, American or non-American, or individual, US citizen or non-US citizen, who engaged in such activities would be heavily punished, likely sanctioned, or even possibly, in the case of a company, shut down and taken over. But for some reason, not Israel. Now we will look at a specific case study. The case of the Lavi fighter program. In the mid-1980s, Israel, heavily subsidized by the United States, embarked on an aviation program to independently design and produce a fourth-generation tactical fighter aircraft. This aircraft was called Lavi. The reality of the Israeli program is that there was nothing independent about the Lavi. The general airframe design was a virtual copy of Lockheed's F-16, and the advanced avionics and fire control radar, as well as the engine that made up the aircraft, were all borrowed products of American industry. I say borrowed because it never cost Israel $1 to purchase any of this equipment, nor did Israel's defense companies have to purchase the rights to reverse engineer the equipment, some of which was in fact reverse engineered by Israel's military industry. The Lavi was basically an F-16, bearing improved offensive and defensive electronic equipment, top of the line, semi-experimental hardware that had not yet even been incorporated into US versions of the aircraft. In addition to this, the Lavi also had canard wings to increase its maneuverability. This specific design philosophy was experimental, but proven by previous European designs. But it was an extremely expensive kind of technology because it requires a very complex computer to actually take control of what is otherwise a completely unstable airframe. In the end, the project was cancelled after having cost $1.5 billion US, with 3 working prototypes having been built. Whilst the aircraft did not enter production, Israel held on to the technology secrets, again, which are really US technology secrets, that made up these prototypes. In 2004, China unveiled to the world its so-called domestically built 4th generation tactical fighter, the J-10. Almost immediately, it became apparent to US military analysts, defense officials, and intelligence agencies officials that this so-called domestic Chinese fighter had a particularly Israeli inspiration to its overall character. Here is a picture of the Lavi fighter. Here is a picture of China's J-10 tactical fighter, which is now in frontline service, with hundreds having been built. The obvious airframe design similarity aside, what this picture will not show you is the aircraft's very advanced fire control radar, which has been reported by official sources to actually be a knockoff of the Israeli-made ELM 2021 radar, produced by Elbit Systems, who in turn received the technology from the United States. This fire control radar, which China is completely incapable of indigenously producing, and therefore has received it from Israel, who received the technology for free from the US, is capable of tracking 6 targets simultaneously and having the intelligence to engage 4 of those targets, which are calculated as the most threatening. The Chinese J-10 program began in the 1980s, around the same time as the Israeli Lavi program. In 1995, the US government openly raised concerns about Israel's re-exporting of Lavi program technologies to China, and despite official Israeli denials, in 1997, US naval intelligence stated a strong conviction that Israel was in fact selling US-derived technologies from the since-failed Lavi program to China in assistance of its J-10 program. And if official suspicions and obvious visual evidence are not enough, then, after endless denials by Israel, David Larry, the General Director for Israel's Ministry of Defense, finally admitted in an interview with the Associated Press that Israel had sold, quote, some technology on aircraft, end quote, to China, and that some Israeli defense contractors may not have, quote, clean hands, end quote. Indeed, the degree to which China has had its military modernized and augmented by Israeli advanced weapons systems and electronic equipment extends far beyond the Lavi program. It in fact includes the modernization of Chinese naval warships with fire control radars that greatly extend the range of their ability to detect and engage enemy aircraft and ships, and the provision of Israel's Python 3 air-to-air missile, which is an upgraded version of the already advanced US-built AIM-9L Sidewinder heat-seeking missile, which gives Chinese fighter jets an all-angle dogfight capability. Furthermore, the CIA believes that Israel at least attempted to market its Delilah light cruise missile to China. The missile uses US guidance technology components, and of course, this set off alarm bells in Washington. A 2002 report by the US-China Economic and Security Review Commission stated that, quote, Israel ranks second only to Russia as a weapons system provider to China and as a conduit for sophisticated, cutting-edge military technology, end quote, and that, quote, recent upgrades in target acquisition and fire control, probably provided by Israeli weapons specialists, have enhanced the capabilities of the older guided missile destroyers and frigates in China's navy, end quote. The key terms to remember here are target acquisition and fire control. This is military electronics, and once again, it is military electronics, not the given weapon or ammunition itself, which actually determines the capabilities of a modern weapons system. Furthermore, let that section mentioning Israel as second to Russia as a Chinese arms providing client sink in for a moment. Now, Russia has no obligation of loyalty to the US or the West, since it is not involved in any security alliance blocks with the US, and quite frankly, the West always attempts to undermine Russia. In Russia's case, it is fair game that it sells weapons to China. But Israel? What is its excuse on this matter? And to emphasize once again, it's not as if mainstream media and civilian and military intelligence agencies in the US are not aware of what is going on. Speaking to the New York Times in 1993, CIA Chief R. James Woolsey admitted that the CIA was completely aware that Israel had, already for a decade by that point, been providing China's military with advanced weapons systems and military electronic equipment for jets, tanks, and missiles. In 2004, an Asia Times article noted that 75% of the production of Israel's military industry fulfills export contracts. This reality alone making Israeli defense companies dependent on the need to sell to foreign customers. And that, in this respect, contracts from China, as Israel's biggest customer, represented the bread and butter of Israeli military industry, which in any case is subsidized by the United States of America. In fact, since the US arms sanctions were placed on China after the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989, Israel has, according to the Middle East Policy Council, effectively become China's, quote, backdoor, end quote, access to advanced Western military and dual-use technologies. The report concluded that Israel specifically seeks to benefit from the US arms embargo on China. In other words, Israel has, in effect, an armaments export scheme centered around selling advanced military technologies which are cheaply acquired by it through subsidization and high confidence to a country that US allies are specifically banned from selling advanced weapons and military electronics to, because 1. There are generally great profits to be had, and 2. The United States seems to do nothing about it anyway. The word treason seems to be lost on the minds of individuals and institutions that can do something about this. It is not warmongering to acknowledge the reality that China, with its current economic, political, and military policies, is a threat to the United States, and more generally speaking, the Western world. And here it is worth noting, without being an apologist, that even the United States, for all its hypocrisy, which is mostly the result of its subjugation to foreign lobbies with their aggressive agendas, is still a much better alternative to a hybrid communist oligarchy with a borderline Orwellian social policy and whose influence and military power to extend this example of existence is in fact expanding. The United States, for all its flaws, leads the world in technological innovation at a commercial level. It is still, by international standards, a free country. That is, as free as you can be in the post-9/11 era. And because of the free market system and political methodology it continues to promote internationally, there exists more opportunity, including the opportunity for change, in the US-led capitalist democratic world than exists in the non-capitalist democratic world, where what absolutist dictatorships say, including about an individual citizen's life, goes and is final. Oppose it and you are an enemy of the state. There is a reason why people migrate to the West after all. Imperialism is wrong, but imperialism is not a product of ideology, as communists believe. Imperialism is the product of power. Powerful nations will engage in imperialism because they can, and that is all there is to it. The question then becomes, which bully do you prefer in a given situation? Some, after all, are more amicable than others. The Zionist lobby is the reason why the US has kicked off so many wars and regime change attempts in the Middle East in the first place. Yet Israel will bolster China's strength by selling advanced weapons to China. China, for its part, pays lip service to the Palestinians and Syrians, acting as if it opposes Israeli aggression. Yet, at the same time, it will buy advanced weapons from Israel in practice. The conclusion here is obvious. Both China and Israel have no loyalty to their allies, nor do they care about a common moral idealism in this world. They are purely selfish and exploitive entities in this world. Neither can be trusted. Now finally, there are all these new moves being made against China by the United States to roll back Chinese military power and economic influence in the Asia-Pacific region. And the fact of the matter is that this would never even be the case if Israel had not helped bolster critical areas of China's war-waging potential. China, regardless of its population size, would have remained a second-class Asian power, and the West and its Asian allies could engage with it on favourable terms of economic and security interaction. They may have even been able to push the Chinese government towards adopting a more democratic approach with its own population. Instead, Israel has helped to fabricate a monster. The Zionist lobby too is responsible for alienating relations between the West and Russia in recent years, forcing Russia to adopt the policy of helping China to be used as a potential card, a form of indirect asymmetrical escalation, if you will, against the West in the Pacific in the event of a major confrontation. It is a dangerous situation, and it could have been prevented if Israel had even the slightest degree of loyalty and ethical conduct towards the United States, which has, for the last 70 years, gone out of its way to protect Israeli interests in every single respect.
To help remove this parasite, the United States must end all aid to Israel. Sadly, both those shirts were ovened as they got rid of our Teasley store, but you can find everything on ancreport.com. We have more on this topic since the making of the film The Parasite. And as you know, things are heating up over Taiwan and West Taiwan again. Thanks again